Hello and welcome to this game review. Happy holidays as well. So in this one, everything went kind of wrong. And firstly, it went wrong in the opening. Starting here, we must think about how we understand this position. And here, black has lost time moving around with the queen. White has some more space in the center. And it's white to move. He can finish the development and try to attack as soon as possible. And this is kind of the point. White has more pieces developed, so he should be trying to play as actively and as quickly as possible before black finishes his development and gets this kind of Caro-Kann structure where his lost time will be made up by good development. So one idea to do this is to play for g4, h4, moves like this with knight e5. For example, if e6, we can play g4, then h4, now threatening to win the bishop. Let's say bishop b4, we can play h5, bishop e4, rook h3, and white has made a lot of progress on the king side, can finish development with bishop c4, bishop can go to d2 as well, the knight can even go to c4 at some point to attack the queen. White is doing quite good here, so this is one idea. If knight d7, knight c4, for example, taking the queen away, then again queen f3, bishop f4, castles queenside, trying to open up the position as quickly as possible and playing as actively as possible in this position. So instead the move a4 was played, but moves like this are very, very strange. This move is a complete waste of time, and it's also counterproductive, as later white could have tried to play for c4, but then the b4 square would be very weak, which means now white has kind of frozen his options on the queen side unless he does something with this pawn. So this is a very strange move, and it's very hard to understand, as in the opening we have three goals: develop the pieces as quickly as possible, fight for the center, and castle the king. And this move doesn't achieve any of these goals. It's simply a waste of time, and now black doesn't really have many problems. Knight f6, now bishop c4, now knight e5 should be played again with g4 in mind, or knight c4, broken bishop c4, e6 castles, bishop e7, bishop d2. So now the development is finished. White plays this move h3, which is kind of a strange move. I don't really see the point of such a move. Again, white should be playing as actively as possible, as the opponent's king is still in the center. Though here, of course, black can castle at some point anyway. Still something like knight e5 with bishop f4 should be an idea. And white is slightly better because he has a bit more space, but it's nothing special. h3, castles, knight e2. So white is trying to improve this knight, but now we're moving around the same pieces twice, so this is clearly not a hope for an advantage. Here, bishop f4 was allowed. Black did not play bishop d6, so this was a good chance to improve the bishop, as clearly on d2 it has done its job. Instead, knight g3, the bishop goes to h7. So now the knight is on g3, but why is the knight on g3? It's not very clear. The white spent 2 moves to go here, and the knight can't really go anywhere else from here, so knight will have to go back at some point, as it simply serves no purpose on this square. So now c3, a5, queen b3. So here, as you mentioned, you didn't really know what to do. So again, generally we should be trying to go forward. And one idea is again to go knight e5. For example, queen e2 to develop the queen, the rook can go to d1. We can play knight e5, maybe f4 then. For example, here, knight e5. If black, let's say, doesn't take, plays bishop d6, we could play f4 at some point and try to attack on the king side somehow. This knight should be removed somewhere, maybe to e3 or something. At some point we could try for f5, and the white is kind of maintaining control, and there are some ideas. The rook can go back to f1, the other rook can join. In either case, we need to finish our development. After queen b3, black can do knight e5. There's also other moves, but the big problem here is that we cannot really play c4, which would be the right move to try to play d5 at some point, because simply the square on b4 is now weakened because of the useless move a4 that we have made quite a while ago. For example, bishop c4, let's say the opponent, I don't know, does nothing. If we play c4, maybe this is still a good idea, but after knight b4, this square is now black's, which will make it quite difficult to progress in the center again. If the pawn was back here, we could play a3. So instead, bishop takes d5. And generally, if we don't know what to do, we should sit there and figure it out. But again, this was a correspondence game, so we shouldn't just do something for the sake of doing something. So why are you playing correspondence if you're not willing to sit there for hours, right? This is kind of the point of correspondence, just to really figure things out very deeply. After bishop takes d5, black can just recapture, and now we have lost the bishop pair. We have very weak light squares. We have this terrible bishop on d2. The pawns are also on dark squares. So black is now clearly better. So we have just ruined our position for no reason. So instead of taking here, we can just make any random kind of move. We don't even have to do anything special. And we should kind of try to improve the position little by little. This knight can go back to e4. Probably at some point c4 should be played. But for that, we will need quite a lot of preparation. So bishop takes d5. Now black is just better for no reason. We didn't have to give up the bishop pair like this. Now c4, which ruins the position kind of further, because now we also have this isolated pawn on d4. And with an isolated pawn, we should play very actively, but this will be very hard to do because we do not have a light squared bishop anymore, which would complement this pawn to go to d5 or to attack the king. We basically have no counterplay here. Our pieces are very bad. So now queen b6 makes sense for black to exchange queens. And here, queen b6 is, of course, just a tactical mistake. You mentioned this was a calculation mistake, but this is not really a calculation, right? Because after queen takes b6, it's obvious that he will recapture, right? There's no over move. And we cannot kind of make a conclusion once there are still forcing moves on the board. And here, as you can see, this is a fork, and we cannot really save both pieces, right? So the game is just over after queen takes b6. Of course, white just move away, and here at least white has the c file, which he can work with. Black does have this very big square in b4, and the bishop pair, so the position is quite sad, but nothing terrible has happened to it yet. Queen b6, rook c1. Now black is up a pawn. Also, there's a weakness on d4. Also, black has the bishop pair. So this is enough to have a completely winning position. So for white to survive, he should get back at least something out of all these minuses. So here he could play d5. This would at least get rid of the weakness on the d4 square, as now we are threatening to take here. Let's save here. We can take. Black recaptures. We can recapture. And at the end of this, we are still left with some problems. Black has a pawn up, and he has the bishop pair. At least there's no weakness on d4. There are other problems, though. So the position is still very bad. b3, knight goes back to b6, knight e4, knight e5, knight c3. So now we are really suffering because of the weakness, the pawn disadvantage. And black can simply promote his a pawn, knight e5, rook d5. And a few moves later, we did get some kind of chances. Black kind of weakened his structure. A few moves later, here we got a chance to eliminate one of our problems again, which is the bishop pair. We have this horrible bishop here, and we can just go bishop c3 to exchange these bishops. And if this is successful, now we are left with only two problems, which is we're down a pawn and we have a weakness here. But on the flip side, now we have a target here as well as a target here, and this knight can eventually go somewhere, maybe c5, d6. We can also threaten to play d5. So at this point, white's problems have been minimized. Instead, knight c4, but this doesn't really achieve much. It's not clear what the point of going back and forth was. And now after knight c4, bishop d3, rook e3, black gives up the bishop pair himself, which is not a very good idea. And now, again, white only has two problems. The pawn is weak, though it's not particularly that weak anymore. And also we are down a pawn. After this, black, instead of attacking the weakness, he creates a weakness of his own. So e5 is a terrible move. So now we can take. Now we only have one problem, which is that we are down a pawn. But black has numerous weaknesses. And what is a weakness is also very important to understand. A weakness is a point or a square that is easy to attack and hard to defend. So in this game, white decided to start attacking h6 and g7. Are these weaknesses? Well, no. h6 is always defended, and g7 is very easy to defend either by the bishop, the rook, the king. So this is simply not the correct target. So what should white be attacking? Answer is these three pawns, mostly these two. And this one is very easy to attack. This one is currently not possible to attack because of the bishop, but we can exchange it. And after the bishops are exchanged, now white has very clear targets on the queen side and here. His rooks are much more active than black's because they're both defending this pawn. So at this point, white doesn't really have that many problems anymore and he can hope to make a draw. After rook h4, this is kind of just a waste of time because attacking h6 is very useless. You're never going to take h6. Again, after bishop c5, rook g3, we should not assume that our opponent doesn't know how to play, right? Of course, you're threatening rook takes h6, but it's kind of hope chess. We cannot hope that our opponent doesn't understand what we are doing, especially if they're at the same level as us. Of course, he will understand. He can play king h7. You could also kind of ignore it like this, for example, and go give a check, take on f2 as well. This is even better as the h6 pawn doesn't really hurt black. But after king h7, these rooks simply do not make any sense, and they should go back to where they belong. Rook c4, bishop c3, and try to retarget the actual weaknesses in the position. After bishop c1, this is again very strange because what is the idea here? You're never going to take h6, so there's no point in putting the bishop on a worse square. It was already attacking here. If you want to make it better, attack this pawn. But bishop c1, now bishop b2. Again, the rooks should go back into the game. They have nothing to do here. These are not targets. These are not weaknesses. And if you attack them, this will be a waste of time because you are never going to ever take them. So there's no point in starting to attack them. So bishop b2. Now, again, the rooks walk around, and here, taking here is a huge mistake because not only are we exchanging pieces, which is bad for us because we are a pawn down, but also we are improving the opponent's structure. Now this is not a weakness anymore. We can start to attack h6, but this is again very easy to defend with bishop f8. And now we don't have anything to attack. Black puts the rook behind the passed pawn, and the pawn simply promotes as we have no counterplay. So the game is effectively over. Now we have a rook endgame down a rook as we cannot move it. So the rest of the game ended as it kind of should. So quite a difficult game for white. I think there's quite a lot to learn here. And firstly, I wouldn't really suggest playing correspondence chess as it's not really a real sport, as you can kind of think about the moves while watching TV, you can walk around, you can kind of forget about the game for the whole day, but it's not really chess, right? Chess is played 1v1 live, right? This is kind of the sport of chess. So I would suggest playing something like 30 plus 20 if you want longer games, and analyze the games straight after. So hopefully this was useful, and see you next time.